Okay, so hey Danica, so glad that you're with me again. Thank you so much for again just being willing to share wisdom and yeah, just your thoughts and stuff are just so valuable of a perspective. So how are you? How are you dealing with things?
I've been emotionally up and down these past couple of days. I feel like I wasn't really even over when Ahmaud Armory was gunned down in the street, and then now it's like this. And I watched the video. I watched what happened. I don't always do that, but sometimes I feel drawn to sort of witness what occurred, knowing that my view counts towards the stack that inevitably is the only way that people get held accountable.
Yeah.
And half the time that doesn't even happen. Most of the time it doesn't even happen.
Yeah.
But it's just I can feel, like, I feel it within my person, just how much people are just done. Like they're just done.
Yeah.
Even with compliance, even with following the rules, even with other people with credentials, other people with credentials trying to step in to hold this person accountable, to hold these people accountable, and to just be completely dismissed and blocked off and threatened. So not only do our lives not matter, but when people step in on the behalf of our lives, those opinions don't matter either. So then what do you do?
Right.
What do you do?
Right.
And I feel like so many people have a lot of opinions on, the way that people need to be processing this. So many people have so many opinions on what they would have done if they were holding the camera, and what they would have done. They wouldn't have done this or they wouldn't have done that. But the reality is that unless you're in that context, unless you're in that situation, you just really don't know, because you have no frame of reference about what it's like to be just in that survival context, when that survival mind is just in complete full red zone. And then to be in that full red zone, in sync with the collective mind of people around you that are also in that zone, you have this sort of amplified phenomena that just kind of takes over. And at this point in time, it's really just a matter of letting things run their course while prioritizing key spaces, right? So for me, what I see when I hear about, oh, they're burning buildings down, my thought isn't necessarily, oh my God, Target, my thoughts are, okay, no residential spaces, right? Daycares, shelters, food places, those are all off limits. Don't contaminate the water supply, and it's so easy to get caught into that mode of logic, that logistical thinking. But I feel like for me, one of the things that I've been most proud seeing is that regardless of who did or did not start the fires, initiate the burning of everything, that when it did get taken over by this collective outburst, that it was mostly, if not all, completely confined to these economic spaces, these corporate economic spaces that are really the culprit behind maintaining these systems. And we talked a little bit about that in our previous conversation, where it was about resource extraction, land, and money. And so we're sort of, I feel like what we're seeing play out is this, even in the midst of the chaos, there's still an identification of what the actual problem is. And the destruction of these objects that symbolize these economic, unjust economic systems, right? The fact that they're burning right now, just kind of shows me that people are more ready for economic restructuring than what they're given credit for. And I feel like it's easy to get swept up into this narrative of people don't know what they're doing because they're angry and they're this, and, you know, they're every other stereotype that we want to throw at people who are grieving, who are grieving not just this incident, but grieving centuries of trauma and centuries of the same kinds of behavior that never, ever, ever seems to change. But the fact that, you know, there's still this collective agreement about, you know, where this sort of outburst needs to be focused on, I think is telling. I think it's really telling. And I think that I saw this meme today on Facebook that Minnesota, in the context of the United States, you know, Minnesota was that quiet one that nobody expected, but was actually a psycho. and you know, we sort of took the nation by storm. We're the quiet one that no one expected to pop off, but we did. Right. And now there's riots not riots, I guess they're more protesting in LA, right? And people are getting hurt there again by police. You know, there's solidarity protesting kind of all over. Yeah. And I think that the more we can talk about narratives that address where this outburst is focused on, rather than getting caught up in the media narrative spinning, I think the more we can lend ourselves to conversations that are more productive in a result that completely restructures our economic and political systems.
So how do you see that happening? I mean, obviously, like the people are done. And the people are like, they're moving. I mean, this is what it looks like when your social agreement disintegrates. This is what it looks like when society falls apart because the systems meant to bring justice and strength and authority and all of the things that the justice and police system are supposed to do for the public good.
I would say purported to do for the public good.
Right, what they're intended, what they're like, their overall intention, not their actual acting out of how it's been, but like what that system exists because it should this, right? And like when it doesn't, when it becomes the aggressor, like and when the social trust, the agreement, like who comes to fix it when the world loses its mind? Like who comes to fix it when the fires begin? It's the people that started it in the beginning. It, like you cannot keep your authority when you have abused it so much. And so like we're watching society disintegrate, and out of that I hope that there's a rebuilding that's very different. And yet what I'm seeing is now the military is going to come and they're just going to reinforce, right? And like I don't know how it changes, and I don't understand I understand what you have helped me see about like how the systems interact and like the commodity that Black people have been this entire time, and all of the ways that the systems work towards the economic benefit of. It's all about resource extraction, like all of the things that you have said. And like, how does that change? Like when slavery stopped and the South had to reinvent, obviously that didn't happen right away, but there are not people right now who are like picking cotton for free. And so there's a system that changed economically there. And how did that happen, and how do we get that to happen? And I mean, that might be a lot longer than we want to talk about right now, but those are, I don't know what's happening and where we're going to go from here, you know?
Yeah. And it's hard to sort of see, it's hard to sort of envision anything like this because everything is still burning. Everything is still smoldering, right? So when we talk about like the phoenix rising, right? But the phoenix has to come out of the ash. If it's not ash yet, the phoenix cannot formulate. It's but it comes from, these kinds of questions that you're asking right now. This, this sort of builds the I guess you could say, the body that, manifests and comes to life. So, we're not gonna, hammer this all out right now, just you and me, and then we're gonna, it's not, that's not gonna happen. But
I can't just share a post and it'll be better. Like,
yeah,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, guys, you asked for it and we delivered. Hashtag allyship. It's gonna have to come from within the people themselves. But right now, that collective mind is in such an upsurge that that needs to explode first before it can be ash and before anything else can rise. And those pieces that we're sort of scrapping for right here, they're not quite there yet. They're not quite there yet. And it's because everything is still needing to collapse, to come down, so that we can see what pieces are left, and then rebuild from there. And in my opinion, bring in new kinds of pieces. But to a couple of your points here, I would say an important thing to understand, especially in this era that we're in, is the way that enslavement has really changed. Even though technically on paper, it's not necessarily built into the written infrastructure on, how a nation is developed. That's very rare to find. No one's that open about it anymore. But the reality is that, enslaved people are still a thing. There's still a global trafficking of people, be it for sex, be it for their labor, be it for their organs, right? Be it for, whatever else. And a lot of these businesses, corporations, especially transnational corporations, really benefit still from the enslavement of other people. So we have this sort of extraction where it's been sort of extrapolated from the national formulations, right, and sort of placed into even more into the capital economic sphere, and then just sort of recontextualized around the world, so that we think that just because I have to pay $3,000 for my new MacBook, that every single person that got, that worked on this MacBook got paid along the way, right? We sort of are buying into that. And we see this with all sorts of companies. Nike is notorious for their sweatshops. I think they're still doing sweatshops even after everybody's come out about Nike having sweatshops. This is still in play, but because it's not written into the frameworks, mostly because of what people have done to rise against that, because it's not written down anymore. It's become a bit more subversive, because the reality is that although we've been able to hold people accountable, what is happening is that people are finding ways to access more capital and access more resources to just better hide what they're doing. And this is, and so then you have policing institutions, right? So you have this sort of corporate model that's really embedded with the politics. I mean, let's just be honest. Like this is a corporate state. We're living on a planet where, corporations are, we have these sort of these disfragmented narratives about, nation states and nationhood, and then corporations and money, and corporations are running the world. Okay, well, if corporations are running the world, they're owning the resources, you know what I mean? Then the individual states, there's not a lot of power that's there if they try and stand, sovereign from these international stakeholders that are hoarding resources, right? So, at some level, there's this fusion of state and corporation, and we even see this with our more recently elected president. And people are outright, I like this person because he's a businessman and he thinks like a business. I mean, like, come on, you can't get any more obvious than that. This is the marriage of corporation and state. So you have you have corporation that already is really slack in terms of international accountability, sort of fused into and permeating into nation states, right, around the planet, so that they're able to sort of fragment and dissociate all of their moving parts and keep people thinking that all of these pieces are separate, when really, again, we go back again to the ones on top that understand that it is all connected. And when we understand police as benefactors of corporate money, laundered through the government, because that's just where we're at this point. When we understand policing institutions as an extension of the government that is already compromised by corporations operating with no accountability, especially towards Black and brown bodies on other parts of the world, right, that still permeates into the very fabric of our political structure. And so what ends up happening is you get the policing institutions who become the foot soldiers that, once again, are only there to protect the flow of capital, which is why everybody gets on a peace and love kick only when the buildings start burning. Everybody gets on a, we need to unite as a humanity. We need to stop letting these issues divide us, without completely glossing over the fact that every ounce of every drop of every second of every day of every year of every century, that division has already been there. That division is already playing out in the way that people interact with one another, in the way that people view themselves. That the divisions are already there. The fires just expose it. And so many people want to, they sort of wait until they see flames, and that's their trigger. That's their trigger because their economic models are threatened. And so anyone partaking in that is once again criminalized into destroying the economic systems. And there's no accountability whatsoever there's no accountability towards these systems, and recognizing where they are continuing to make violent realities for people in the day-to-day. And that's reinforced by police, who serve as more or less de facto foot soldiers to keep these capital models running, to keep these capitalist systems running. And I think that as more people come out of this, I'm hesitant to say collective fog, because it has this, this connotation of like confusion and I don't know what to do. And no, people are very clear. They're very, I know that in their minds right now, they're very clear on what's happening. They're very clear on what needs to happen. They're very clear on their actions. So I'm not going to I use that term fog very loosely. I use that term fog because it more denotes those that are physically situated in that context right now, right? So I'm not part of that fog. Being up in greater Minnesota, I feel the impact of it. I resonate with the pain. I empathize with this, but I'm not physically, geographically placed in time space in that here and now for this group, right? So as the fog, as you get away from the fog, it sort of dissipates, right? So this is how I'm using the term fog, like a literal fog, where you have those that are in the core, in the densest of it, and then you have where the fog sort of tapers off, and then you can see the entire fog, from, and then you make a choice about how the fog needs to be moving. Well, you're not in there to know what's actually happening, right? But as people sort of work through the outbursts around this collective trauma, there will be, I feel personally, there will be a move toward changing not just policies and institution, and not just, directly changing police behavior and this sort of thing, because we already know that's a redundant, we already know that that's an empty cause. But what I'm starting to see already are partnerships with other kinds of institutions, partnerships with other people in power that are, slowly sort of awakening their own social consciousness to understand, like, hey, no, this actually isn't working. You cannot build a viable socioeconomic system off of slave labor, whether it's whether you're building it, directly by housing people, by housing people in a factory warehouse that's making the stuff, or whether you're building slave labor by selling things in Target. that was shipped halfway across the world, or, or not, maybe not Target. I mean, whatever space where that are selling goods, in a market that's completely abstract from the conditions of enslavement that produce these direct materials that are consumed halfway around the world someplace else. So no matter what, no matter what am I trying to say? I want to say stratosphere. I don't know why. And no matter what
stratification.
yeah, no matter where you lie in that stratification, you're still contributing to the movement of capital that keeps these systems in play. And so there's a lot of solutions to be had. There's a lot of solutions that are already well written about, that are already well documented. There's a lot of solutions, I feel personally, in things like Indigenous sovereignty, pushing for sovereignty models that can serve as templates, through which we can build an entire nation. But you can't do that if you don't have any case studies or any models that are actively going anywhere. So there's infinite solutions to what feels like a hopeless and helpless situation. But we need to sort of work through that sense of hopelessness and helplessness in order to, how I am understanding, to reaffirm ourselves as the creator of our reality. And that's not just on the individual level, the creators of our collective reality. We need to renegotiate, our collective agreements with one another. And I feel like the only ones who aren't willing right now to do that, the only ones who aren't actively doing that already, are people that continue to be making a bunch of money just by owning things.
Yeah, or people who are, I think, indoctrinated into a system. Like I just think about so many people, so many white people that I know that like vote against themselves, right? Like they hate Obamacare, but they get their stuff from the Affordable Care Act. You know what I mean? Like there's this system, and I'm seeing it right now. I think some of the things, I guess, just kind of to reflect back what I'm hearing, because I'm definitely not as I'm not as versed in some of the things you're talking about, but I see them in our daily, like I see them in the space here, right? Like there's you could talk about like slavery outside of the outside of the United States, but when you're talking about like South Minneapolis, when you're talking about Target, when you're talking about Amazon, when you're talking about everything that has absolutely just come to light out of this pandemic, you see Black bodies that are essential, which means they have never gotten a break in all of this. They have gone where the germs were. They have come back into work so that the economy can keep going. The people who are rioting on the steps of the Capitol are still going to work from Zoom, but they would like the Black and brown bodies to come and work at Target so that they can come there. And so and these bodies that are there taking the risk and taking the death, there's a reason that the death rates are insane and the infection rates are insane. It's not because Black people are like somehow more susceptible. It's because they're working and everybody else gets to isolate. And so you have this whole buildup of this system, and they're going to Target and they're taking all that risk and they're bringing home $7 an hour and they're living in crap hole apartments that they can't afford. And the police are constantly, they're
bullying, threatening.
Right. And I mean, this George Floyd died because he passed a fake bill, they say, right? And I mean, from what I've heard, that didn't even happen.
Right.
But let's just even say that it did.
Let's just,
okay.
Let's
give that to the people.
Let's just
go. So you have a system where these people are taking all the risk, they're taking all the poverty, they're taking all of the, and then you add the policing on top of, because you're poor, you you look at these poor communities of color and you say, well, of course he's passing a bad check and I need to teach this man a lesson. And right. And you have kind of, we talked about a little bit in the last video, that idea of like Philando Castile and like all of the, you know, the 55 different stops that were just like pile upon pile upon pile until he owed 17 grand. And like there's this hole that gets dug deeper and deeper and deeper. And yeah, they're not going after the bodega on the corner. They're taking down Target because you know what? And the thing that I saw today when the mayor and the police chief and the city council person talked was this idea of there's a pandemic and communities of color need these buildings, and we can't allow the public health to be brought down for these poor communities of color. We need these, they need food and they need, you know, and I mean, they've shut down the Blue Line, and I mean, that's fair, right? They've shut down the Blue Line. There are people, I'm sure, in these spaces who can't get to their jobs. Like there's collateral damage there. And you're not worried about them. You're worried about Target. You know, like, and what I've seen in my space right now, like, so like the city liquor store got broken into in Heights, and there's a bunch of people that are really upset. And now like all up and down Central Avenue, all through like the malls around the cities, like stuff is closing because all the Targets are closing. And now white people are pissed. Why? Because they can't go to Target. And it's not about any of that stuff. It's about, you have now inconvenienced me. It's the same way when the highways shut down after Philando. It was suddenly about the ambulances, you know, like it was suddenly about it. Let's be honest, you're upset you can't get to work, you know, and like, and there's that idea that
inconvenienced.
Right. Well, and that idea that like economic generator is the point, right? Like I can't get to work on time, and so it's going to cost me money to care about your pain. And that's not worth that.
Care about your life.
Right.
That shows you what's important. Right. Is, you know, is this this to me is where I start to see, you know, like just the nuances, especially in the white community, because you know, I wait for people's responses, and there are people that are responding to the riots before they're even attempting to address what actually happened.
Right.
And that to me is, you know, it's never surprising. It's never surprising anymore at this point, to be honest. But it just exposes how ingrained and how in a sense that we could say naturalized, you know, it's so quick. It's so easy to just understand this situation as, well, we need to protect the economy because that's the only way that we've been told to live, to function. You know, we don't have a society without it. Right. But, you know, built under that whole narrative, which is full of fabrication, but built under all of that are still the backs of Black and brown people propping that up, still holding that up. And when that falls through, you have everything that starts to cave down, right? But then it becomes their fault for not propping it up, so that you can be serviced. That's what blows my mind. That's what blows my mind. And you have on the one hand, these national narratives that are like, folks want to get back to work. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I can't take responsibility. They want to get back to work. People want to get back to work. There's nothing I can do about it. Send them back to work. But then you have the people that are protesting, that are out there talking about, I want a haircut. I want my nails done. I want to be able to buy food. I want to be, you know, it's just, I want you to cater to me in the midst of a global respiratory pandemic. And if you don't, then you're buying into fear, and you're buying into liberal media that's making everything worse than it already is. And the reason why I can believe that this whole COVID narrative is blown out of proportion is because I'm not sick and nobody that I know is sick. Well, no, because it's Black and brown people that are dying. And so it's just this loop that keeps feeding itself over and over again. But this is capitalism. Capital consumerism. That's what it is. I have a right to consumption.
Right.
That's just the whole narrative. I have a right to consume. And if you don't cater to my right to consume, then you are infringing on my right. And what do you do when you infringe on rights? Well, you pull out the shotguns and you go hunt somebody down.
And you have a responsibility to produce is the other half of it, right? There's that space of the welfare mom narrative, the space of like anybody who gets help,
the single
from
black mother, single
any space,
the entire country,
right? Just having babies for cash, right? And so like you have, but I mean, even in like, you saw it in the depths of the narrative in this thing. You had people that said, I would die for our economy. I mean, like, you had like truly conservative people going, I'll go to work, and I'll die for this economy because that's what I should do. Because if I don't have work, if I don't have meaningful work, if I don't produce, if I don't do the things that keep the economy running, then I don't have value, and I don't have work ethic, and I don't want to hand out, I want to work. And like all of these like narratives that go into the system that says you have to produce to have value.
Yes.
And you have to consume to have rights, right? And so you have, and yeah, you're right. Like it all rolls downhill though, right? Like you've got poor white people, and then black people, and then Hispanic people, and then like people who are here without papers, and that, I mean, like all
labor, right?
Right.
That is
right.
The essential workers. I mean, this is slave labor. That's exactly what it is.
Right.
And you want to run a whole campaign on stopping people, from coming to the country to be slaves, right? But then you want to turn around and deem their work essential when it's convenient for you, because you need to keep some sort of economic model running.
And when your resorts and hotels need laborers, you are the first one to get all of the work visas.
I just hope to God he's not hiring all of the rapists and the murderers that we keep hearing about.
That would be rough. He would have competition then.
This must be a highly screened process. I hope everybody recognizes that. Like, but and also to that point too, with the mayor of Minneapolis and the chief of police, I personally didn't see this, but I'm going off of how you're explaining this to me, and it sounds again like this same old narcissistic posturing that posits, the solution to your pain is the systems that cause it. Right? So stop pretending that you care about black babies. Stop pretending that you care about people wanting to get back to work. Stop pretending that you care about any of that stuff when you don't. And where I get frustrated is when I see people that I know personally, that I love and care about, buy into this BS. And, really just get on a kick that I have to do this. I have to go to work. I have to, I have to contribute. I have to I have to be the good slave so that, I have some shot of a semblance of a life. And I think what quarantine showed us is that most of that's made up. I have a parent right now whose business completely transferred to online. And they're doing fine.
Right.
They're doing fine, right? So a lot of this is ego, where first of all, your job is not as essential to the running and the functionings of the economy that you've been inflated to think that it was. First of all, your job is not as important as you thought it was. And the people whose jobs are essential to the economy are people that people whose daily realities you're constantly dismissing. Right. People you're running over to get to work. Are the ones that you need to function in this economy.
And people that you have sworn up and down should not have living wage. There are
Right.
people that, you know, these are jobs for high schoolers. You shouldn't
Yep.
have adults doing them. And then when it comes down to, we're going to do the bare bones of society to keep everybody fed and alive,
Who
guess
are
who
the bare
has to go
bones?
to work? It's
Yeah.
the
Who are the
$7 an
bare
hour
bones?
guys. Yeah.
It's Black and brown people that continue to
Mhm.
be the backbone of this economic structure.
Yes.
And honestly, I mean, just from my privileged standpoint of not having to be in the middle of that collective outburst right now, um, I'm personally was relieved to see that these economic symbols were burning, but it can't just stop there. We have to keep pushing forward with real reformative change, real restorative change. And I think that the more that people, especially people who aren't in the density of this fog right now, because when that burns out, there's going to be a sort of lapse in energy, right? Because when you run all that out, you're going to just kind of, collapse. So when that does, it's up to people that are more or less on the outer edges of the fogs, to come in and keep and start rebuilding. And this is where we cannot drop the ball. State of Minnesota, I'm looking at you. We cannot drop the ball. We can't let all of this effort, all of this grief, all of this collective release. And it's not just their release, that's my release. Everything that I've been through that I can't express outward in my day-to-day life because it's irresponsible. People are doing it now. Right. So this isn't just a release valve for individuals that are angry and now they're together and now it's just this compounded thing. No, this is the release valve for the collective, for the entire nation that doesn't have, for the entire nation comprised of many individuals that have no outlet to express these feelings of oppression, these feelings of trauma, these feelings of anger or rage or guilt or sadness or hopelessness or helplessness. That energy has to go somewhere. That has to come out somewhere. And now it is being embodied, where you have this sort of national and I would argue global weight that's bursting through, being embodied in a small segment. I mean, the flames might look big, but the reality is that this is a small segment of this huge global system. Right. That's still operating. Even with the flames, there's still money being made somewhere on the planet right now, even with this being, with this going up in flames. Right. So, when that energetic movement moves out, finally is get released out. Like I sort of think of, you have a boiling pot with the lid on top and it has that hole where all the steam's coming out. So you have all the pot, everything's boiling. You have all the steam that's under the cover, but you have this tiny little hole. That's the release valve. And believe it or not, the flames of Minneapolis is that tiny little hole with the release valve. So the more that you keep covering up, the more that you keep dismissing it, and then adding fire to the heat underneath the pot that's already boiling, the more that everything is just going to boil over. So these businesses and these corporations are going to need to start making some serious decisions on the way that they structure and function, not just in this state, not just in this country, but around the world. And until those decisions start being in congruence with conversations that are happening like this, like you and I, like other people that are on the ground right now in Minneapolis at 9:29 p.m. right now today, unless though that restructuring is in congruence with the needs and it is imbued with the inherent dignity that these collectives have, then you are going to keep losing money. You are going to keep losing buildings. You are going to keep losing everything. And so you either get on board with where the people have already decided they want to go, or you lose out on everything. And we're getting to the point where you're gonna have to pick one. And I don't like to sort of, well, it's us versus them, it's this side or that side. It's not. This is sort of extrapolated from this one side or another type thing, because the reality is that to try and have one foot in the middle on each side is still causing death.
Right.
It's still causing enslavement. It's still causing trauma. It's still causing pain. These systems need to completely stop or completely crumble. There's no middle ground when it comes to this, because here we are talking about the capacity of our species to survive on this planet. Because you're not just extracting life in the terms of black and brown body lives, you're extracting life in the terms of the ecological diversity of the entire planet, right? And so this, you know, this focus on black and brown bodies is really sort of indicative of, it's really sort of the tip of the iceberg. And underneath this iceberg that you and I are talking about right now, that we could spend years and years talking about, this tip of the iceberg with its complexities and its nuances and its layers and the spectrums that are inherent within that. But underneath that, right, is a dying planet. That's what's underneath all of that. And so whether that change is going to come about through the movement of people, or whether that change is going to come about from the movement of the planet itself, people are going to need to start making some serious decisions on whether or not they want to stay here, and whether or not they want to stay in this game of life on planet Earth. Because with the rate that we're going right now, there's no outcome where these capital modes of extraction and production increase the viability of our planet as a whole, one, and of our species. So, I mean, people are going to need to start really looking at their behavior and their ideas, and start seeing, you know, from the 2 or 1% on top, you know, all the way down to even poor people who think that, you know, I might be poor, but at least I'm not black, all the way through to everybody. Everybody's going to need to start taking a hard look at where they fit in this stratosphere, where they fit in, you know, in this stratification, and need to start making some changes to make this more equitable.
So what I'm seeing, and what I'm afraid of, like, so the dichotomy that you just put out there, that we either need to change or we need to, it's going to explode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those would both be really good things, right? Or, I mean, like,
Yeah.
those would both be change.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, the patterns that I'm seeing, and what really made me so upset today as I watched the police chief and the mayor, was they are highly invested in the straddling, right? They're highly invested in, let's just turn the heat down enough that it continues to simmer. And when I think about the idea that it's been 400 years of slavery, like, it never exploded, right? Like, it never stopped. And when I think about like the Revolutionary War, where we like broke out of the pattern of colonization and started this crazy democratic governance that's like totally different than like that system, the idea that a system would so change that you would see, I mean, obviously it didn't, all of the things, even there, like all the things that you're talking about economic extraction didn't change, like all of that still stayed there, right?
It wasn't the monarchy,
right? And so, like, I'm just like, I think one of the things that's so hard for me when I hear people talk about peace right now, when I hear people talk about unity, when I hear people talk about, let's just calm down, let's just grieve, like, they're saying, let's just release enough steam that you don't explode, right? Like, they're highly invested in
keeping things the same.
Yes, status quo, and in like allowing the oppression to continue. And I think, like, one of the things that I'm seeing change is, and maybe it's not, one of the questions I'm being asked more often than I used to is, how do we make this stop? Like, white people going, this can't go on, this has to stop. And then the next day when the riots start, they're like, oh, they shouldn't do that. No, and there's this like, we
Yeah,
need we
there's,
need
yeah.
we need peace. We need a peaceful
Mhm,
solution. And
mhm.
like, honestly, it needs to explode to the point, like, I feel like when you were talking about the phoenix, right? Like, I just feel like she's just been like smoldering for
Yeah,
centuries,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
like, the whole point is to continue to let her smolder, so she
Yeah.
never fully bursts into flames. She never
Yeah,
fully becomes who she's
exactly.
supposed to be. And
Exactly.
like, the white narrative of shh, 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 shh,
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
what perpetuates this. It isn't
Yeah.
just policing. It's
Yes. Yeah.
until
Yeah.
white people are like, light this thing on fire, are
Mhm.
you going to see any kind of change? And when
Mhm.
white people revolt, I mean, I was thinking about this today, like, patriotism and revolution is a white privilege, right? Black people are not allowed to do
I
that. They
know.
never have
I
been.
know. The Boston Tea Party. Don't sit up here and tell me that destroying property, is something that disqualifies your narrative. No, it
Right.
doesn't.
No.
It only does it when you're black and brown.
There.
That's the only qualifier. Yeah,
Yep.
like stop. But there's just again, it's just the hypocrisy, and it's people want to help until they need to look for solutions that they can't come up with on their own.
Right.
So we need to find a way to come together over this. We need to find a way to, to help communities of color, but then want to turn around and tell these communities how they should be behaving in this kind of circumstance. And that there's still this desire to maintain a one-up, to maintain a privilege, to maintain a one-up, so that we can still control what these people are doing, but I just want to help them, through this trauma, right? And so it's white people especially, need to be consistent. They need to be consistent with, are you here to help, or are you here to just keep reaffirming these things that lead to this kind of actions, that inevitably spark the desire of a revolution, so it's gonna be, like I said, I feel like a lot of this is still going to be a little bit hazy, because the ones that are working through this energetically the most are still in that haze. So those pieces aren't quite available to us right here, right now. And so we have to learn to sort of take comfort and solace even in the discomfort, right? Take grounding and be comfortable in the chaos. And this is a skill that is really hard to master. This is a skill that's really hard to do, because everybody wants to make change until you feel discomforted, until you feel threatened, right? And then the instinct is to retract and find a way to posture so that you can just reaffirm the old.
Right. Yeah, we'll choose the pain we know over the
Yeah.
unknown
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
time. Every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when white people aren't actually in pain.
Yeah, well,
Like,
yeah, and then they don't want to address that. They're scared of black and brown people.
yeah.
They're scared of what we're gonna do, what we're gonna do. If the tables are turned, because there's no understanding of the humanity of black and brown people.
Where
All
there's a complete understanding. I mean, there was a woman in the 60s that like did this thing with people like, how many of you would like to be black today? And the white people were like, no, thank you. No,
no
thank
one
you.
raises their
They
hands.
they
Yeah,
know
you
darn
know?
right. I mean, the biggest fear is that black people would come around and treat people the way that white people treated
Yes.
them. Like,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
fear there, I don't want, that whole narrative of like, we can't let, so and so outnumber us. Pretty soon these people are going to outnumber white people. And like, the only reason that scares you is because you know darn well that you would deserve what you got in that space. You know what I mean?
That's already been the case. It's only
Right.
your guns and gunpowder that makes you think otherwise. But those numbers have never added up. Spoiler alert.
Right. Right.
You have an entire continent that already outnumbered you. And then let's throw in Latin America, and then let's throw in Native Americans, and then let's throw stop. Stop. You've only been the majority in terms of power dynamic, but that's only been because of technological advances in terms of weaponry and the ability and capacity and desire and drive and necessant drive to resource extract. That's it.
Well, in the militarization of authority, I mean, right? Like the idea.
This is the weaponization of people, right? That shifts power, to a small few.
Right. I mean, like when you're talking about the police force, right? When you're talking about the idea that the Second Amendment applies to everybody except Black people, like the idea that white people are super scared that Black people have taken over the streets of Minneapolis right now, and the idea that the people who have been oppressed could rise up is super scary. And so there has been a complete, like from day one, anytime you see a Black person with a gun, you shut that down. And like it's a threat. And, Black people are going, why is that a threat? I'm not threatening you. And there is a subconscious understanding that we're the Black people to get together and decide they wanted to be in power, and we're allowed to have those guns. Look what would happen to the world. And I think that there is an intrinsic reason for white people to be afraid. And I think that there's a reality, especially in this generation, of people who understand the abuses of what slavery was, the abuses of the civil rights movement, the abuses of even this. Like there is a self-protective fear within white people that goes, man, they would have the right, and
scared we'll scalp hunt? Huh? Are you scared we'll send dogs after you?
Scared we'll kneel on your neck until you suffocate on the ground?
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the things, like, there have been a few people that have been talking about, like, people get so upset when you say these guys should be in jail. And I'm like, I'm not saying that we should do to them what they did to him. I'm saying they should go through the justice system that they denied him. Like,
I know. So much of this is just warped. And but I feel like our best bet, especially moving forward, is to sort of establish some target, like short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, right? And even just starting at long-term and kind of working backwards. Like long-term, I feel like there needs to be a reform in education. I mean, there's so much that we have to deal with in our day-to-day, let alone trying to transition an economy away from what we're contributing to in our day-to-day. There's a paradox there. But you have an entire sector of our population that, for all intents and purposes, aren't really engaged in that directly, right? So you have a group that is right in the middle of it, but in some sense still outside of it, because they're not directly contributing to it or participating in it. Now, obviously there's changes when, parents give their kids money and they go and buy things, this sort of thing. But this is in a sense like a black market, of kids with allowance that are running around and participating in the, in the economy this way. But I feel like just better reforms through education, I think is going to be key, is going to be huge to this, because a lot of young people have solutions and creative solutions, right, to help solve and resolve and fix this and heal this, right? There's a lot of hope that's in young people that are just sort of absent in your and my generation, because we've been just so conditioned to holding this dream and then never ever seeing it manifest, right? And but here you have an entire group that is able to sort of hold the dream, and then kind of in their day-to-day, when they're in privileged spaces, because not all young people are able to live out that dream, when and how they want to, right? That's kind of the goal of kids, I see, and then like midterm, just in terms of organizing organizing collective response that is just varied. We need to have different pieces moving at different times all of the time. And the reality is that Black people and brown people in Minneapolis were pretty much already doing that. There's organizations, there's councils, there's nonprofits, there's community centers, there's programs, there's all sorts of pieces that are moving around towards empowering people. And I think in those kind of midterm spaces where we rebuild those cogs and prioritize those cogs to be moving. I think that we need to also run parallel issues around Indigenous sovereignty. And I understand that can be hard to sort of bring in this whole, what is often constructed as entirely different narrative, but really what we're talking about is the inherent sovereignty of the body, the inherent sovereignty of the person, right? And especially when it comes to sovereignty over land and sovereignty over space, right? We start getting into conversations where we understand the importance of the abilities of bodies to move away from violence when they need to. Because you have some bodies who can do that, and you have most bodies that can't do that, that just cannot move away from systemic violence, from interpersonal violence, from physical violence, from financial violence. So we don't have to, change the entire economic structure of the state overnight. We don't have to do that. But we need to start putting things in place that move us towards a model that supports the sovereignty of the person, the responsibility of the person, because that sovereignty, how they're calling freedom, but that sovereignty is it comes with responsibility to your health, responsibility to the collective, right? Responsibility to the whole. And this is what sort of, for me, in my understanding, this is what these narratives of sovereignty really imbue, and responsibility to the environment, responsibility to the planet. And in these national narratives on freedom, it is almost completely absent any reconciliation of the person back to the land, of the individual, ingrained into the geography of a space. It's completely abstracted, right? Because the money does that engagement. The money does that for us. We don't do that. The money does it for us. These corporations, build machines that interact with the land for us. And while I'm not trying to say that we need to get rid of technology and that's the solution, that's not really it, but the point is that the farther distanced we are from directly engaging with the land and natural resources, the harder it is to sort of have these conversations on really who is a person and who is not. Because then, exactly how you said, it becomes about who is able to participate in the money that's interacting with the land, who is able to participate in this fake made up casino that we call Wall Street, that we call our economic model. It's really just derivatives and algorithms and guesswork and gambling. That's what it is. That's just what it is. So it becomes about who can provide the most value in continuing these economic programs. And these kinds of conversations I see are already happening between Black and Native people. Like they've been pretty long-standing, but I see now, especially in the middle of this, a lot of people in the Native community really supporting Black people. I know a lot of people in the Native community who are so Black Lives Matter, because they understand that they're also talking about themselves. They don't have to be saying Native Lives Matter when they say Black Lives Matter in order to know that it means also talking about the inherent dignity of my body as well, being Native to Turtle Island, right? So there's that understanding, and I feel like this coalition that's built between a group that's sort of running this long-standing sovereignty fight and the group that is also running a long-standing sovereignty fight, but has been sort of relegated to the civil sphere, right? The rights sphere, the legal, the paperwork, the institutional of the country that took away this sovereignty, right? You know, sort of relegated to that space. I see this merge where there's starting to be a bit more overlap and a bit more focused collaboration between these two groups. And ultimately, I feel like that's the direction, that's the long-term direction that we're going to go towards. But establishing points of key conversation, like and establishing intentional spaces to have those kind of conversations, is how we're going to get all the pieces that we're trying to grapple at right now, is how we're going to get all those pieces together. Because ultimately that's what democracy is, that we all have a piece of democracy, and it isn't until all those pieces can come together, and it isn't until we can negotiate them equitably to fit together to make the structure that we want to call whatever the country is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much of what you're saying, I think, was just completely like road mapped again by this virus, right? Like you have the meat packing and processing plants that have been like the epicenter of not only like the epicenter of the virus, because like they're this industrial complex, but then as they like fell, because again you've that mechanization, that the industrialization of what used to be the land, right? What used to be farming, what used to be an economy unto itself. And now you have, I mean, the suicide rates amongst farmers are like off the charts, because like all of those systems have been eaten by this industrial complex. And you see that all it takes is something as tiny as a germ, right? Like when you get back to like the systems of like creation in the land, and something that's organic that you cannot control or plan for or fix, like it's a germ, like it's the sand that gets in the cog and shuts it all down. And you know, the water withstanding rock, like if you poison the water, I understand you're going to make money, but everybody's going to die. Like you can't, if you take the water in Flint and you fill it full of lead, it isn't just that people have yucky water, there's generations then of children that suffer, and like it kills your economy, and pretty soon Michigan itself suffers, and and all of that is because Nestle wanted more water to run their stuff, you know, and like and you have like the greed and we see it play out. And what you said about like there are some people who get to move away from that. Like there are some people that don't live in Flint anymore because they could buy a house somewhere else. And you know, and when you look at like the migration of people, it's that space of, I'm afraid that the white people are just going to build more and more and more walls. And you know, the brown bodies are the ones that are going to die first. And by the time that it's going to get to the point that white people feel it, it's going to be so far beyond, like, you know, it's going to be done. And
that tends to be my fear too, is that, you know, by the time anyone realizes it, there's going to be so many dead that maybe white people will be the majority. I mean, that's where I'm at, just in terms of looking at the numbers. And so this is again where it's, you know, it's hard to sort of see any sense of hope, you know, in all of this. Yeah.
I mean, even for the white people, like eventually there's not going to be any more water, right? Like eventually there's going to be a space where it's gonna come down, and there's just this devotion that we have to, yes, the economy and the industrialization and all the things, like we don't see around the corner that eventually it hurts us all. Like right now we don't really care because it doesn't hurt us, but like, you know, it's the same thing with our systems of governance. Like if we allow abuses of power that old thing of, you know, first they came for these people, then they came for these people.
Yeah.
And when they came for me, nobody was there. And like, if we don't care because we don't think it affects us. But I love what you're saying about that native mindset that's like, it's intersectional. It's all connected. And if you hurt, I need to hurt, because I cannot forever keep moving away from your hurt.
Yes.
Like, we're gonna run out of land at
Yes.
some point, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely spot on. Another component I want to bring into this too, which seems a little bit kind of out here, but this is still sort of holding gravity here. I've been sort of really delving into climate science literature from the U.S. Department of Global Change Research Program, U.S. Global Change Research Program, yeah. And I read the National Climate Assessment in and out that was released on Black Friday of last year, and in that assessment are kind of two key things. First being this admission, right, three key things. So first being this admission that indigenous frameworks and indigenous ways of being offer solutions to climate change and climate mitigation. And that the more that these voices can have equitable seat at the table, the better off that the whole planet is going to be. So there's that. Second of all, another important admission that runs right in tangent with the first one, but is still important to have a separate recognition, is that, you know, Western frameworks and Western understanding does not have the answer to everything. And contrary to popular belief, you know, there are limits to Western science to understanding what is going on with the planet and how to resolve it. Third, which I saw interesting, was that a lot of these publications kind of come with this contingency, like, yeah, we're going to publish this data where we're going to recognize that we need to bring indigenous voices. We're going to recognize, you know, in the National Climate Assessment, they state outright things like racism, things like mental health are directly contributing to climate change. That systemic racism causes changes in our global climate. Like, I mean, the fact that that's out there and has the stamp of like how many, you know, I think like 12 different branches of our government has stamped, signed, sealed, and approved that, yeah, this is accurate information. You know, racism is contributing to changes in our global climate. And the reason why is because, again, the resource extraction, right? And you have this disequitable system of labor, right? And this disequitable system of like waste disposal, you know, who lives by where all of the waste and industrial spaces are, the tolls that it takes on the hospitals, the tolls that it takes, you know, just the unnecessary amounts of sickness that come on the heels of resource extraction is felt by brown and black bodies. And so this environmental racism is not necessarily always outright stated, but they still dance around that concept that, yeah, there's racial divisions, there's racial stratifications, that impacts the way people engage with the economy, that impacts the way people access health, that impacts the way people access water. And ultimately, the collective result is our climate is getting worse because racism is impacting the way we engage with the environment, right? And and then the other key, you know, interesting thing is that, you know, although they're willing to admit this, I feel like the reason why they're able to put as much in, you know, point blank period, this is what's happening, and here's our data, and here's the data, you know, of indigenous people that are aligning with this, is also this narrative that, well, we don't recommend policy changes. we have to tie our hands down if we're going to be telling the truth. And they kind of are, pit in this battle. You either can do a lot of stuff and can enforce a lot of change and make a lot of change and do a lot of stuff and not really know jack squat about anything, or you can know what's going on, right? Know enough to understand that the system itself needs to be entirely disrupted, but you have to surrender any power to make any sort of change. So I find that interesting, that I personally feel like the only way that it kind of passed through to publication was to have these sort of statements in there. But ultimately it's good because at least the information is out there and it's free. I highly recommend people read the 4th National Climate Assessment, because they talk about things like age, they talk about things like mental health, the impact that the environment and changes in our environment has on our mental health, right? And then, they talk about, urban mental health and then rural mental health spaces as well in some of these publications from this group. And the awareness is there of the kinds of changes that need to be made. It's about synthesizing the resources and making sure that the information is, permeated through everywhere, right? And kind of get everyone on the same page. Even if we don't all agree with where we want to end up, we can still agree that we need to move away from certain kinds of systems. And what we need to move away from is very much well identified in the National Climate Assessment. So even if we don't have a blueprint for, what do we want it to look like, those pieces are still coming together, and that's fine. This is okay. But we can still make shifts away from these systems that are already admitted to being directly contributing to climate change. And what is crazy to me is how rises, and this is exactly this is how it's framed in the 4th National Climate Assessment, that we should expect to see an increase in global sicknesses and global diseases. We should expect to see an increase, not just in terms of, the sickness itself being something foreign or something super strong or something untreated. I mean, that yes, the intensity and the severity of the sickness is expected to rise as our climate changes, but the duration of the sickness, right? How many people get sick, how long people stay sick, reinfection, right? Where something might clear up, but then all of us, it's resurfaced again months later or weeks later or a year later, right? So there's already a framework in place to understand COVID-19, and it was buried in the National Climate Assessment, that was buried in national discourse because it was released on Black Friday. And then, shortly after, I think a month after that, you have this whole COVID-19 thing that's a brewing away, and then 2020 hits, and now everyone's stuck in COVID, and no one, and it's hard to sort of get out of that unless you kind of already know where to be looking. So yes, I highly, highly, highly recommend people look into the United States Global Change Research Program, because find the publications, and here's what you want to look for, because there's different stamps of approval, and not all of those books agree with one another. I'll tell you that right now. They're not all on the same page with the urgency of change that needs to happen. And this is, for probably a million reasons that I don't even know right now. But what I look for, what I filter through, are the ones that are in direct collaboration with Indigenous groups. That's key. If that's not there, I would take with a grain of salt what's in the rest of that book. Second of all, groups that are willing to admit to things like racism and that contextualize our social problems as contributing to climate change. If they're not willing to do these two things, chances are you're not really sort of getting a full narrative of what's happening. This, from what I've seen, from my experience with these kinds of texts. But I have been in the National Climate Assessment. I've also been diving into publications on the Arctic Circle, which is huge for our region and is huge for our state, because the integrity of the Arctic Circle is what really helps sort of regulate the integrity of our seasons in the Great Lakes, right? The integrity of our water here, which, you know, water, there's already sort of this battle for land. But if we could not tack on a battle for water, which kind of is already happening, but if we cannot exacerbate, right, the battle for water, especially being where we're at, situated on the Great Lakes, where we're pretty much sitting on the nation's water reserve, right? So if, you know, if we could keep all that clean so everybody downriver can stay healthy and stay, in you know, my utopia world, stay where they are and not have to come here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you know, if you want to play into these fears of immigrants, you know, at least be freaking constructive, and at least be, okay, well, play on the fears of immigrant to the extent that you enact change that keeps people's environments healthy and sane and stable so that people can stay in place where they are. If you really don't like immigrants, then keep their countries okay, keep their spaces okay, keep their water clean. Don't complain about immigrants and then still be trying to extract gold out of Colombia. Like stop. You know, stop right. Contributing to the reason why people need to leave. You know what I mean? So, and the same works in our country too. The same, you know, just within the borders too. So, I feel like these unities between, especially Black, immigrant, and Native communities is going to be key for this sort of grassroots on the ground, like boots on the ground. You know, how do we get the different physical spaces mobilized and synchronized with one another on a structural level, especially in terms of structuring our education and the way that our young people are educated. That's already changing because of quarantine and COVID-19, but sort of integrating climate science that is systemically aware of racial violence and that is aware of the ability of traditional ecological knowledge, like indigenous knowledge bases, as having inherent value, first of all, and having inherent value in the conversation on climate science. These are the kinds of mechanisms that we need to sort of instill in place. And that'll happen. We'll get there. I mean, you and I, we're doing this work already. I mean, you're going to go off and do your thing. I'm still going to go off and do my thing up here. And, you know, we'll all sort of run back into each other. But I feel like once this sort of explosion sort of, you know, runs its pace, then we can have some blueprint of where we need to start moving towards. And I think there's going to be a lot more, I think people are going to be more amenable, like more agreeable to wanting to go with this route than they have been in the past. That's how I feel. That's how I hope. I hope people are far more receptive to these ideas now. And I feel like there's a lot of evidence to show that they may be. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's so many different colors and experiences that are represented in those that are quote unquote rioting, right? So there, you know, you're really sort of seeing the universality of oppression and struggle here. But how many centuries of Black people had to die in order for people to get to that level?
Yeah.
So we're going to have to start having those conversations. But for now, it's important to withhold judgment as these groups, especially if they're not being interpersonally violent and they're not jeopardizing the homes and the safety of communities that are already vulnerable, right? I mean, for me, the fact that they're just targeting corporate America, that's not, I mean, Target charged me $30 for this purse, and now they're under the ground. Oh, that's sorry for you.
I hope they have insurance. That would be.
I know. You know, they probably do. You know, they do. And so don't tell me that we're ruining the economy when we're literally giving you a reason to keep on with your economy in the form of insurance. So, I mean, don't feed me that line. But I feel like the more that people can sort of collectively mobilize, not just to damage the embodiment of exploitative capital resource. And by the way, this whole looter narrative is complete nonsense. A friend of mine had made this impactful quote on Facebook, and they said that one cannot loot what is already taken through exploitation. It's all, everything in Target is already looted. Everything in these businesses are already taken through exploitation. So you cannot loot what is taken already through exploitation. And but the more that people can start collectively developing a vision to unify under, that isn't necessarily, it can be the outburst, but you'll catch more people that are on the outskirt of that fog when they can sort of unify. Okay, this is the outburst, this is what's happening, this is what has to happen, we'll let it run its course, we'll reserve the judgment, we'll be there, you know, when they get done, we'll be there to help prop them up, hold them up, you know, or rest, you know, whatever they need. But then start setting these broader community frameworks in place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the big questions has been like, what do we want? Like, what would stop this, right? And I mean, the idea of like, I've heard people say like, I'm not leaving the streets until they're in jail, and yet like that's not really. I mean, yes, and right, like that's a start. And so I've loved this conversation because you have such a broader, global, systemic view of how things interconnect, in a way that I think I see the pieces a lot of times, but I don't always see the strings. And so I really appreciate your time and the way that you've webbed things for me. And I think, as white people, I think to understand what it has been to have everything, all of those resources extracted, all of those, the commodification of everything that is a Black person, like everything goes to serve things that they don't benefit from ever, right? And like, and understanding that it isn't just that they're dying in the streets. That's like, that is the culmination of all the things, you know? And so, I just thank you so much for your time and for being amazing.
No, thank you. And for me, I like things like this because, you know, first it's safe, right? You know, we have an ongoing relationship. There's trust and mutual respect there. And so I feel comfortable being able to share my opinions and my thoughts and my research and my labor and, you know, everything that I, you know, am working towards up here. But also too, you know, this is part of, this is my part, you know, in all of this writing. You know, this is my riot. This is the component that I bring, on behalf of those who cannot right now even begin to be in the frame of mind that I'm in. So, you know, it's important to me now more than ever to be speaking into these spaces and to be hopefully having influence into these kinds of spaces so that there are other narratives and there's another context for what's happening besides just, oh, there's Black people looting again. This is why we need the police. And I think, you know, the last that I had heard, Minnesota, and this I had heard last year, was Minnesota, you know, there was a riot bill on the table to militarize the police even more. And it's just, you know, there's just so much, you know, what are you scared of? What are you so afraid of? And
an uprising.
You're afraid of exactly this. So everything that you do to mitigate your fear and to keep people suppressed so that you don't have to be afraid, it ends up, you know, fulfilling what you were initially afraid of. And I hope that more and more, especially white people, see that. So get off of the peace kick, get off of the unity kick, get off of the love kick, because if you can't see the burning of the economic systems that continue to exploit brown and Black people today, then If you can't see that as love, you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
If you can't see that as unity, if you can't see that as trying to, a collective move toward reclaiming humanity, toward reclaiming inherent dignity, if you cannot understand that, but you want to, check out what she has to say. If you don't want to, don't pretend that you're an ally. Don't pretend that you're in it for humanity. Don't pretend that you're connected to, you have a human perspective. Don't claim to be a humanist. Don't. So, I mean, at this point, I mean, I don't like to make ultimatums, but it's getting to the point where too many people are already dead, and too many people are still dying and going missing. And we have to get more people in positions of privilege and power to sort of make those internal changes, even if all you can do is deconstruct your own white supremacy so that you're not microaggressing every brown and black and immigrant person that you come. Even if that's all you can do, you can radically change the way that we live.
Imagine how less tired Black people would be and how much more they'd get done.
Imagine how many jobs we could have if you weren't aggressing us all the time. I mean, you know what I mean? You want to talk about bolstering the economy, leave us alone. Stop calling the cops on us, huh? Man.
Just let us watch birds in peace.
Man.
Oh my gosh.
But,
yeah, no, for real. You had said something before we started laughing and I lost it now, but
even if all they wanted to do was deconstruct yourself, that's a huge step. That's a huge step because it takes the burden off of, especially me,
mm-hmm.
People like me and darker, right? That have to constantly be fighting to show that we're human beings, right? If you could sort of take that load on, the more of y'all that can take that load on and be talking amongst yourselves, talking in your communities about this kind of thing, honestly, the better. The better. And even if the economy doesn't change, even if the politics doesn't change, even if the policing or whatever doesn't change, those institutions slowly shrivel away. You slowly take power out of investing into those kinds of spaces, and then they become those outliers that everybody seems to keep talking about. They don't become the norm anymore. Right, because there's more accountability. And for what it's worth, while we're trying to make a move to transition out of our current capitalist structure, we cannot underestimate in the immediate now, in the short term, we cannot underestimate the power that is in money that people already have. So if you already have it, transmute it. If you already have it, don't try and skate by with, well, we're going to get rid of the economy anyway, so I'm just, no, if you already have it, you're responsible for it, and transmute it so that it turns into mobility for somebody who doesn't look like you. And if that's what if you're not doing that with your money, if you're not willing to do that with your money, and especially these Christian circles, I'm looking at you, don't come to me about no Jesus talking about give up all your possessions and become poor and follow me. Like, I don't want to hear nothing about none of that stuff then. If you're not okay? Yeah.
No, I mean, honestly, like,
you don't even have to give all your money away. You don't have to give all your money away. Pay for the lawyer of the guy who was just killed. Yeah. I mean, like, it doesn't have to be this big radical, I'm going to live in a hut outside of Walmart. Like, it doesn't have to be this big, even these, start small, start with something that might seem big for you, but it's just, and make it an ongoing thing. Make the movement of your money that has been extracted from bodies and from land, make the movement of that so that it turns into mobility for somebody who doesn't look like you. And the more that you can do that, the more that these systems are going to change in a way that you probably won't expect. Because one thing I will say is that there are a lot of Black people who were really touched by the support of those white people working toward allyship. I think I feel like that really was a change that I had seen in the discourse on who's involved in the rioting and who's involved in everything, and where, where were you when this happened? I mean, a lot of, even in the middle of all of the pain, there was a lot of people that, I mean, we know who's down for us. We know who is. And once you're our people, you're always going to be our people. That's just how it is. But the ones that are scared of the rebuttal, if you're scared of retaliation, chances are there's a layer of your consciousness that knows that you're on some kind of BS somewhere. That's exactly what that fear is. And if you're not doing the work to figuring out where it is and then correcting it,
yeah,
then I hope to see you on the other side.
I mean, that's the marker of the oppressive system, right? Yeah. It's when, if you don't perpetuate it, you're punished. And I mean, that really, like, honestly,
yeah,
the vocalization that I've been doing in the last few days has come out of a sense of, I have walked away from anything that had power over me. Like, the systems that I used to try and fit into, I finally went, you guys are not cool. Like, the things that you're asking of me, there's this constant carrot of, if you do the things that you're supposed to do, then we will give you this. And I spent 20 years in it, and I never got to the place where I get anything. I just have to, like, keep giving and keep shutting up and keep not talking. And as
the carrot.
And as soon as I stopped caring what they think, and I stopped saying I'm gonna perpetuate the system, and I just started talking and going, like, whatever, like, thousands of people suddenly, I mean, when I've spent 20 years begging for a voice in a system that was oppressive, suddenly when I said I'm done with the oppressive system, that's when I started to actually make a difference any place. I mean, not whatever, I understand that what I'm doing is not gigantic, but like the idea that there's like a voice, right?
Right, within your influence are people that are looking for what you have now. They're, they're people are looking for that now. They're probably tired of being white. They're probably tired of being Karens. I mean, I hope they are. Maybe not Karen, but they're tired of the same old, but they don't necessarily know how to get themselves out, because every time they go and try and find for answers, exactly how you said, they get shut down. So it's easy to feel alone in this, but that's an illusion in and of itself. You're not alone in trying to deconstruct all of this, but just don't expect brown and black people to do that work for you. And so long as you're willing to, to take responsibility, and it's a hard journey. It's a brave journey. It is. I have to do that within myself. Right?
We all do.
Yeah. I mean, we all do. So yeah. I like this. I like where this is going. I like that, that I can sort of talk to you and, like, de facto be talking to an entire community of people that probably wouldn't have heard my voice otherwise, and a lot of that's not necessarily their direct fault. A lot of that is just, due to the way that technology and digital information and the way that everything has already been set up for so long, right? So we're really sort of able to bridge and share information, with one another, without having to rely on the systems that set up the divisions in the first place. Because if we're doing that, we're going to keep swimming in the same pond, and it's dried up.
Right.
It's dried up.
Right. Yeah, I'm so grateful just to, like, be able to, I think you had said, like, if you can just deconstruct your own privilege, like, that would be a win. And, like, that's what I feel like I'm doing, right? Like, I feel like I'm so, like, baby stepping on the front ends of stuff, and, like, the people that I'm educating are at a space where, like, they're just baby stepping into the pool, and then to be able to, like, not have to know all the things, like, to be able to just take your voice and go, Danica she's lived this, and she's studied this, and there's an experience within the Native community that I can't even begin to understand at the point that I'm at. And, like, the fact that I can just amplify your voice instead of having to always be the voice that's talking, I think is a huge thing that I've been trying to teach my white friends. Like, you need to you need to tell the white people the hard things, and you need, I told a guy today, I was like, listen to Black people and fight with white people.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. That's it.
Like,
that's all you gotta do.
Dude, take the rage for them, and then just give them a megaphone for the things that they know that you don't. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to do that, and that you're willing to put your wisdom out there. Like, it really is. I said it earlier in a different post, it's a gift, and I know that it has not come cheaply to you. And so I want you to know that it's valuable. So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, we should probably cut this.
Can I read the Harlem poem by Langston Hughes?
Yes, please.
Okay. I love this, because this just encapsulates everything we've been talking about, everything that people are going through right now. So this is Harlem by Langston Hughes. It says, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" And I think the answer is all of the above. And the culmination is the explosion. Yeah.
I'm waiting for the phoenix out of the ashes. Yeah. I'm excited about that metaphor.
We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And, and thank you to all those dear ones that are, in the midst of this struggle, trying to deal with this collective outburst that probably to some extent is probably more in control of their physical body than what their conscious logic mind is. So that, we've done a lot of work just in deconstructing, through the talking, but the ones that are living this right now, these are the ones that we do this work for, right? So yeah, thank you to all of us, and thank you, and I'm excited to see where all of this goes.
Me too. Thanks, Sinika.
Have a good night.
Me too.